I knew something was wrong the moment I turned the corner to my driveway and saw two strangers hauling my living room lamp toward the back of a moving truck. The late afternoon sun hit the brass base just right, and for a second, I thought I was looking at my late husband's hand on it instead of a stranger's. My breath caught, sharp and cold. That lamp was the first thing Walter and I bought together after our wedding. Seeing it carried away without a word felt like my heart was being quietly unplugged. I stepped out of my old Buick, leaving the door half open, and walked toward the porch. My knees ached, as they always do in November, but the ache was nothing compared to the tightness in my chest when I saw my son David standing by the doorway with a clipboard. He didn't look surprised to see me. He just pushed his glasses up and said, "Mom, you weren't supposed to be back until tonight." I remember blinking at him as if the sunlight had suddenly turned too bright. "What is going on?" I asked. There was a wobble in my voice I hated hearing. I've lived 68 years, buried a husband, raised two kids, paid every bill on time, survived 2 recessions. Yet the tremble still finds me when I feel blindsided. One of the movers, a broad man with a tattoo of a lighthouse on his arm, stepped aside respectfully. "Ma'am, your son said everything was cleared. He signed the downsizing agreement." The word downsizing hit me like a gust of winter wind. Have you ever had someone decide the shape of your life without even asking you? That's what it felt like, a rearranging of my world, carried out in boxes and trucks by people who didn't know a thing about me. I told the movers to stop immediately. My voice came out stronger than I expected. They hesitated, then set the lamp down gently, watching me the way people watch a fragile vase teetering on an edge. Inside, my house felt half alive. The bookshelves were emptying, the framed photos stacked against the wall, kitchen drawers hanging open like startled mouths. I saw an envelope on the counter, my name written in David's handwriting, and a pit opened in my stomach. Something between guilt and anger flickered in his eyes when he noticed me notice it. I didn't open the envelope. Not yet. Instead, I looked at my son, the boy I once patched scraped knees for, the man who now spoke about efficiency and market value as if they mattered more than memories, and I asked the only question that made sense. Why? He exhaled sharply, the way he always does when he believes he's being the practical one. "Mom, the house is too big for you. The heating bills alone are ridiculous. You're wasting money. You've talked about being overwhelmed and, well, I found a smaller condo near my place. It's ready for you. I signed the documents so we wouldn't lose the reservation." I felt each word as though someone was slowly tightening a belt around my ribs. I had told him I felt lonely sometimes. I had told him the water heater was acting up and the grocery bags felt heavier these days. But I had never asked him to take away my home. I had never asked him to decide I needed less of a life. My daughter, Mary, wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. She lived 2 states away and called once a week, usually while doing laundry or sitting in traffic. Good intentions wrapped in thin paper. I looked around my living room, at the indentation on the carpet where Walter's recliner used to sit before the movers dragged it out. I felt myself drifting backward into old memories. Our first Christmas here, the night the roof leaked, and he held a pot under the dripping water, laughing at the absurdity. I had kept this house after he passed, because it was the one place where I could still feel him. "David," I said softly, "you had no right." He looked genuinely confused. "I'm trying to help you. You should be thanking me." Isn't it funny how people can hurt you while believing they're saving you? Have you ever noticed that? I picked up the envelope, weighed it in my hand, and realized something then. Something quiet, but sharp. For years I had allowed my children to talk over me, decide for me, assume I didn't know what I wanted. After Walter died, I started shrinking myself without even noticing, saying yes to things to avoid conflict, letting them handle my taxes, my repairs, my paperwork. I told myself it was easier to let them feel useful, but this crossed a line I should have drawn years ago. I unfolded the envelope at last. Inside was a condo contract with my forged signature. An attempt at it, anyway. David's handwriting was too neat, too controlled. Mine was loopy from arthritis. Anyone who knew me could see the difference. Something steadied inside me then. A small, firm click, like a lock finally aligning. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply set the paper down and walked to the phone on the wall, the one I refused to replace because it still had Walter's voice recorded on old message tapes. My fingers didn't shake as I dialed the local police station to request an officer to mediate what I called an unauthorized property removal. David's face drained. "Mom, you can't be serious." "Oh, I can," I said. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. Not the fragile version my children imagined. Not the background character in their busy lives. Just me. The operator asked for details, and I gave them calmly, treating each fact like a stepping stone across a river. I watched my son swallow, his throat tight, his clipboard trembling now where my hands had steadied. And as I stood in my half-emptied living room, listening to the assurance that an officer would be on the way, I felt something warm blooming in my chest. Not anger, not revenge, but a quiet understanding that I was done being invisible. I didn't sleep that night. Even after the movers left and David drove off in a storm of wounded pride, the house felt tilted, as if someone had rearranged the gravity inside it. I kept walking from room to room, touching the empty shelves, sliding my fingers along the dustless rectangles where photo frames had sat for years. The silence felt swollen, like it was holding its breath. Around midnight, I finally sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea. The steam curled upward in thin, ghostly ribbons. I stared at the condo contract he'd tried to imitate my handwriting on. My name, but not my hand. My life, but not my choice. How strange it is when someone tries to rearrange your world for what they call your own good. Have you ever realized too late that you were being handled like a fragile object rather than a person? The next morning, just as the sun began to rise, golden and slow across the backyard oak tree, a police officer knocked on my door. Officer Ramirez, kind eyes, steady posture, her badge catching the early light. She stepped inside respectfully, looking around at the half-packed state of the house. "I understand there was an attempted removal of property without consent," she said. I nodded and handed her the documents, the moving company agreement David signed, the condo papers, the fake signature. She studied them carefully. I could see her eyebrows tighten when she reached the contract page. "Did you authorize any of this?" she asked. "No," I answered. "And he forged my name." There was a quiet moment, the kind that feels like it changes the temperature in the room. She asked if I wanted to file a report. I told her I wanted a record, something official, something undeniable. I wanted proof that I was not confused, not mistaken, not being dramatic, as David liked to say. Just a woman standing up for the home she built with her own hands. She took notes, meticulous and patient. When she left, I felt a strange relief, like I had finally stepped into my own skin again. Later that day, Mary called. She must have heard from David because she opened with, "Mom, what did you do?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened?" Just instant blame, wrapped in disbelief. I told her everything. How I'd come home to see strangers hauling away my life. How David had already chosen a new place for me without asking. how he'd scribbled a false version of my name on official documents. There was a long silence on the line. I could hear laundry tumbling in the background. "Mom," she finally said, "David probably meant well. You know how overwhelmed you get with paperwork." I closed my eyes. That old sting of invisibility pricked the edges of my heart. "I get overwhelmed because I'm tired," I said, "not incapable." She sighed, in that rushed, distracted way of hers. "Maybe just let him help. He doesn't want you living alone in that big house." I looked at the sunlight drifting through the kitchen window, catching dust motes like little floating stars. This house wasn't just space, it was history. My history. I realized then how much I had hidden my loneliness from them, how often I said, "I'm fine," just to avoid being an inconvenience. Maybe they thought I needed saving, because I'd been pretending I didn't need anything at all. After we hung up, I made myself a small breakfast: 2 fried eggs, a slice of toast, and a few strawberries. The ordinary act felt grounding, real, mine. That afternoon, I drove to my bank. Linda, the teller who'd known me for nearly 20 years, greeted me warmly. I asked for printouts of recent transactions, account settings, and any authorizations. She slid them across the counter, her voice gentle, as if she suspected something was wrong but didn't want to pry. Back in my car, I skimmed through the papers. There it was, a request David submitted 2 months earlier to be added as a financial contact. It didn't grant him access, but it positioned him to take over if I were unable to manage my own affairs. My chest tightened. So this wasn't impulsive. This was planned. Have you ever discovered a truth that made the air feel heavier around you? Driving home, I felt a strange calm settling over me. Not cold or bitter, just resolute. I realized something very simple. I had allowed others to tell me what I needed because I had forgotten how to say it myself. That would end now. That night, I spread every document across my dining table: bank forms, the forged contract, the moving agreement, even old receipts showing the house was fully paid, the utilities in my name, everything that proved my independence. I stared at them until the edges blurred, the way stars do when you stare too long. I wasn't going to fight my children with anger. I wasn't going to scream or accuse. I was going to use something far more powerful: the truth, written in ink and signed in my own hand. The same way I had signed the mortgage with Walter on a humid July afternoon 42 years ago. As I gathered the papers into neat stacks, a quiet certainty settled into my bones. This wasn't just about the house. This was about reclaiming a part of myself I had misplaced, somewhere between grief and motherhood. And maybe, just maybe, I was stronger than they remembered. The next morning, a soft gray mist clung to the yard, the kind that makes every sound feel muffled and distant. I stood at the kitchen sink rinsing my coffee cup when I caught my reflection in the window. Tired eyes, silver hair pulled back, a woman who looked like she had survived more winters than she cared to count. And yet, behind all that softness, I saw a steadiness I hadn't noticed in years. I needed guidance, someone who understood paperwork, signatures, consequences. So I called Mr. Harlan, the attorney who handled Walter's estate after he passed. His voice sounded the same as it had 15 years ago, warm, calm, just a hint of southern drawl. "Come in this afternoon," he said. "Bring everything." I gathered the documents into a canvas bag Walter once used for fishing trips. On my way out, I paused by the old coat rack where his hat still hung. I touched the brim lightly. "Wish me luck?" I whispered. Funny how talking to someone who's gone can still feel grounding. At the law office, the receptionist smiled and led me straight back. Mr. Harlan looked up from behind his big oak desk, glasses low on his nose, gray beard trimmed neatly. He stood to hug me, something he'd never done before. And that small kindness nearly unraveled me. I spread the papers across his desk, the forged signature, the moving agreement, the bank documents. He adjusted his glasses, studied each sheet with slow precision. When he reached the fake signature, he sat back and exhaled. "This is serious, Evelyn." Hearing my name spoken like that, full, not Mom, not Ma, but Evelyn, reminded me I was more than the role my children kept seeing. "I don't want to punish him," I said quietly. "I just want it to stop." "You don't have to punish him," he replied. "You simply need to protect yourself, legally and firmly." He explained the options, how forgery, even within a family, carried legal implications, how property ownership was clear and fully in my name, how the moving company contract could be voided since consent was never given, how bank permissions could be tightened with a simple form. Everything he said felt like a small brick being placed back into a wall I thought had crumbled. "Evelyn," he said gently, "you're not helpless. You never were." Something in my chest loosened, like a knot finally giving way. When I left the office, I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I stopped at a quiet diner off Maple Street. It was nearly empty, just a young couple sharing pancakes and an older man reading a newspaper. I chose a booth by the window and ordered a chicken salad sandwich. The waitress, a girl named Rosie with chipped pink nail polish, smiled when I thanked her. That small warmth settled over me like a blanket. My phone buzzed. "David." I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. He launched right in, no greeting, no breath. "Mom, you need to stop making this bigger than it is. The officer told me you filed a report. You're overreacting." Overreacting? A word women my age hear too often, usually from people who don't understand the slow erosion of being ignored. "I didn't overreact," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You crossed a boundary. You're living alone in a house too big for you. I'm trying to help. Help is something you offer," I replied, "not something you force." There was a silence on his end, long, sharp, defensive. Then, in a smaller voice, "I thought you'd be grateful." Have you ever noticed how the people who hurt you sometimes expect applause for it? I told him calmly that I had spoken with an attorney, that all actions from now on needed to be discussed, agreed upon, and documented properly. His shock came through the phone like static. "You got a lawyer involved?" "No," I said gently. "I got myself involved." I heard him swallow. "Mom, are you really doing this?" For the first time, I didn't rush in to soothe him. I didn't try to make him comfortable. I simply sat with the truth. "Yes," I said, "because I need to live my life, not the one you think I should have." We hung up without saying goodbye. It hurt, but it also felt honest. Back home, I made myself a cup of peppermint tea and sorted through the documents again. I signed new bank restriction forms. I placed the forged contract into a labeled envelope. I wrote down the officer's case number. Each small action made me feel more rooted, more present. That evening, as the sky shifted from pale blue to lavender, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders. The neighborhood kids rode their bikes past, their laughter bright against the cooling air. I hadn't noticed in a long time how comforting everyday noise could be. I wondered, as I watched the streetlights blink on, when I had first stopped believing my voice mattered. Maybe it was after Walter died. Maybe it was after the children built busy lives I didn't want to interrupt. Maybe it was just easier to be quiet. But quiet can be mistaken for agreement. Quiet can be mistaken for weakness. And now, as the porch light warmed the steps beneath my feet, I felt something like a seed beginning to sprout inside me. A slow, steady reclaiming. This was my home, my life. my voice, and I was learning to use it again. The following morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains in thin gold lines, brushing the floor with a warmth that felt almost intentional, like the house was reminding me it was still mine. I wrapped my cardigan around my shoulders and walked slowly from room to room, noticing every detail the movers had disturbed. A tipped-over photo frame of Walter and me on our 25th anniversary, a stack of cookbooks shoved carelessly into a box, my crocheted blanket half pulled apart from rough handling. Each little disruption echoed the bigger one inside me. I made oatmeal and sliced a banana over it, the same simple breakfast I'd made for decades. But for the first time in a long while, it tasted steadying rather than routine. I realized then that I needed to let someone else know what was happening. Not Mary, not David. Someone neutral, someone honest. So I called the community center. There was a senior support group I'd heard about but never joined. "Just come by," the coordinator Stephanie said. Her voice was bright, but not intrusive, the kind of voice that makes you feel welcome just by existing. I almost didn't go. I almost canceled 3 times before noon. But something nudged me, maybe pride, maybe stubbornness, maybe the quiet whisper of Walter's old advice. "Don't let yourself live small, Evie." So I went. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old books. Folding chairs formed a loose circle. A few people chatted quietly, 2 women sorting knitting needles, an older man with a cane tapping the floor rhythmically as he waited. When I stepped in, the conversation softened, not out of suspicion, but curiosity. Stephanie greeted me at once. "You must be Evelyn," she said gently. "Come sit wherever feels right." I chose a seat near the window. The group began sharing. Stories about downsizing, caretaking, loneliness, the strange tug-of-war between needing help and wanting independence. I didn't plan to speak, but when a woman named Carol mentioned her daughter insisting on taking her car keys for her own safety, something cracked open inside me. The room blurred for a second, and suddenly I was talking, quietly, but steadily. I told them about the movers, about the forged signature, about the way being treated as fragile can feel more painful than being ignored. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but instead my voice just trembled at the edges, like a leaf in a mild breeze. When I finished, the room was silent, but not an uncomfortable silence, a knowing one. Carol reached over and touched my hand. "People forget we're still living," she said. "Not just being managed." Her words sank into me like warm tea on a cold evening. After the meeting, a few of us lingered, talking about practical things. House repairs, reliable contractors, even the best brands of reading glasses. It felt strangely healing. Community, even in small doses, is a kind of medicine. When I got home, I found a voicemail from the moving company manager. His tone was cautious but respectful. "Ma'am, we need to clarify the authorization for yesterday's service. It appears there may have been a misunderstanding. We'd like to review the security footage from our office and the intake forms." A misunderstanding. That word carried weight now. I called him back and scheduled a meeting for the next day. I printed copies of the police case number and tucked everything neatly into a folder. I was tired of being the quiet grandmother who nodded along. I could handle a meeting. I had handled much worse in my life. Hospital bills, funeral arrangements, raising 2 children during years when money stretched thinner than paper. Late that afternoon, as I was organizing my paperwork, David pulled into the driveway. My heart stumbled. I almost didn't open the door, but that felt like a retreat I no longer accepted from myself. He looked softer, not apologetic, not yet, but uncertain in a way I hadn't seen since he was a little boy holding a bad report card behind his back. "Can we talk?" he asked. I gestured for him to come in. He lingered by the entryway, as if afraid to cross some invisible line he now recognized. He rubbed the back of his neck. Mary said I need to cool off. She thinks I crossed a line. She's right, I said gently. He nodded slowly. I thought you needed help. Real help. You hide things, Mom. You say you're fine when you're not. I hide things, I said, because I don't want to burden you. His forehead creased, a wounded expression flickering. You're not a burden. But you made decisions as if I were. He opened his mouth, then closed it, and for a moment he looked so much like Walter, caught between guilt and responsibility, that my chest tightened. I'm sorry, he finally said, barely audible. I exhaled softly. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was something, a crack in the wall he'd built around his certainty. I'm meeting with the moving company tomorrow, I told him, and I've spoken to a lawyer. I'm handling this. He swallowed hard. Do you want me there? It surprised me that he asked instead of assumed. No, I said. This one I need to do myself. He nodded, accepting it in a way he wouldn't have just days ago. He left with a quiet goodbye, and the house felt lighter, not fixed, not healed, but lighter. That night, I sat by the fireplace with one of Walter's old mystery novels. The flames crackled softly, casting warm shadows across the room. For the first time in years, I felt the faint outline of something I thought I'd lost. My own agency, stretching its limbs like a long sleeping cat waking up. Have you ever felt that? The moment you realize you've stepped back into your own life? As I turned the page, the house seemed to breathe with me. Slow, steady, alive. The morning of the meeting, the sky was a washed-out blue, the kind that feels both calm and expectant at the same time. I dressed carefully, nothing fancy, just a soft gray sweater, slacks that didn't wrinkle too easily, and the pearl earrings Walter gave me on our 30th anniversary. They always made me feel grounded, as if a part of him walked beside me. Before leaving, I stood in the hallway and listened for a moment. The house made its usual sounds, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, a faint tick from the living room clock, the sigh of air through the vents. After the chaos of the movers, the stillness felt like a blessing. I locked the door with a steadiness I didn't feel a week ago. The moving company office sat in a small industrial strip near the edge of town, between a tire shop and a carpet warehouse. The glass door jingled softly when I stepped inside. A young receptionist glanced up from her computer, her expression friendly but cautious. You must be Mrs. Grant, she said. Yes, dear, I replied. I'm here to review the authorization documents. She led me to a small conference room where the manager, Mr. Porter, waited. He looked to be in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and glasses that slid down his nose every few seconds. He stood when I entered, offering a polite handshake. Thank you for coming, ma'am. We wanted to straighten everything out properly. He placed a stack of documents between us. Intake forms, signatures, timestamps. He explained their procedures, how they always verify identification, how they rely on written authorization, how they record all sign-ins with office cameras. We take these matters seriously, he said. Your son presented himself confidently. He said you were too overwhelmed with packing and preferred that he handle the paperwork. A tiny knot tightened in my stomach. How easily confidence can be mistaken for authority. He clicked a few keys on his laptop and pulled up the camera footage. There was David, walking into the office with determined strides, signing papers with a briskness that made my throat tighten. He didn't hesitate, didn't question whether he had the right. I watched myself through his eyes for the first time. A woman he believed needed managing, a woman he thought he could speak for. Ma'am, Mr., Porter said gently, this signature doesn't match the one on your driver's license. No, I said softly. It doesn't. He asked whether I wanted to void the contract, and I told him yes. He printed the cancellation papers, and I signed them with my real handwriting, looped and shaky, unmistakably mine. That alone felt like claiming a piece of my life back. Before I left, he said, "I'm truly sorry. People don't always realize how much autonomy matters." His kindness surprised me. For a moment, I felt the sting of tears behind my eyes, but I blinked them away. I didn't want to cry in a moving company office. On my way home, I stopped by the grocery store. It felt nice doing something ordinary, picking apples, choosing a loaf of wheat bread, chatting with the cashier about how unpredictable the weather had been. Sometimes normalcy is its own form of healing. As I loaded the bags into my trunk, I heard my phone buzz. A text from Mary appeared on the screen. "Call me when you can. David is upset. Says you embarrassed him." I stood beside the car, one hand on the grocery bag, the other gripping the phone. For years, that kind of message would have made guilt wash over me like cold water. But not today. I didn't call her right away. Instead, I sat in the driver's seat and took a slow breath. Embarrassment wasn't the issue. Accountability was. When I did call, she answered quickly. "Mom, what happened at the moving company? David says they called him." "They reviewed the documentation," I said calmly. "The contract was invalid. I voided it." "Mom," she exhaled, frustrated. "You know he's trying to help. You're making him feel—" "This isn't about how he feels," I interrupted gently. "It's about what he did." She fell silent, the kind of silence where someone is rearranging their arguments like puzzle pieces. I pictured her pacing in her kitchen, her voice tight, convinced she was being the reasonable one. "I just think," she said finally, "you're being a bit harsh." "Harsh," I repeated, tasting the word. "Mary, he tried to move me out of my home without my consent. He forged my signature." "I know, but—" "There is no but." Another silence, heavier this time. "Maybe," she said slowly. "I just don't understand how alone you've been feeling." That was the closest she had come in years to acknowledging my inner world. It loosened something in me. "You're all busy," I said softly. "I never wanted to demand too much." "Maybe you should have," she whispered. I didn't reply. We said goodbye gently, and I drove home with a strange blend of sadness and strength sitting side by side inside me. That evening, I sat on the porch again, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The sky turned shades of rose and amber, warm and fading, all at once. The quiet settled around me like a shawl. Have you ever had a day where you feel your life shifting, even in small ways? That night, the house felt different. Not quieter. No, quiet I'm used to. It felt more mine, more anchored, as if reclaiming the space on paper had reclaimed something inside me too. I didn't know what would happen next with David and Mary, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid to find out. The next few days passed in a strange mixture of peace and unease, like standing in the doorway between two rooms, one familiar, one waiting. I spent my mornings tidying the spaces the movers had disrupted, returning items to their places slowly, almost meditatively. Each object felt like a restored piece of myself. Walter's books went back on the shelf in the order he liked. History, then mystery, then the gardening manuals he never followed but loved to read. There was something healing about putting things back where they belonged, but under that quiet rhythm, I felt a deeper shift beginning. I found myself lingering at the window, watching neighbors walk their dogs, couples jogging past, teenagers biking by with backpacks carelessly bumping along. For years, I'd watched the world, not stepped into it. Now I wondered if maybe I'd let myself fade too far into the background. One morning, while dusting the living room, I found an old community newsletter tucked under a pile of magazines. It listed local meetings, book clubs, gardening circles, and something that caught my eye: a weekly memory and moments group at the library. A place where people shared stories from their lives, light or heavy, funny or painful. I folded the newsletter carefully and slipped it into my purse. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. My heart jumped before I even reached the hallway. Ever since the movers incident, any unexpected sound felt sharper. But when I opened the door, I saw Officer Ramirez standing on the porch, her warm expression immediately easing my shoulders. "Mrs. Grant," she said with a small smile. "I'm just stopping by for a follow-up. Mind if I come in?" I invited her in, grateful for the steadiness she seemed to carry with her. She glanced around the living room, noticing the half-unpacked boxes. "Looks like you've been busy," she said. "A different kind of moving, I suppose," I replied with a small laugh. We sat at the dining table and she reviewed her notes. "I wanted to confirm the cancellation of the moving contract and make sure you're feeling safe in your home." Safe. The word settled strangely in me, not because I felt unsafe, but because no one had asked me that in a long time. "I'm all right," I said. "Just adjusting." She nodded, sliding the case file back into her folder. "And your son? Any more attempts to remove property or pressure you to relocate?" "Not since our last conversation," I said. "Though I imagine there's a storm brewing in his mind." "I see this more often than you'd think," she said softly. "Adult children feeling entitled to make decisions for parents who are perfectly capable. It's a form of overreach, sometimes well-intentioned, sometimes not. But either way, you did the right thing documenting everything." Her reassurance felt like a soft weight on my heart. Solid, steady, welcome. "Thank you," I said quietly. "It helps hearing that." As she left, she paused at the doorway. "If anything feels off," she said, "call us right away. You have every right to protect your autonomy." After she drove off, I stood on the porch for a long moment, breathing in the cool air. The world felt different now. Not gentler, not harsher, just clearer, like a fog lifting. Later, I decided to take a walk. The crunch of leaves under my shoes felt grounding, the autumn air crisp on my cheeks. I passed the Miller house, where little Sophie was drawing chalk flowers on the driveway. She waved at me enthusiastically, and I couldn't help waving back, a warm flutter stirring in my chest. At the park, I sat on a bench near the duck pond. A young couple fed the ducks, laughing quietly. Watching them, I felt a tug, a mix of nostalgia, and something new, something like hope trying to stretch. Have you ever felt a small piece of yourself return, so quietly you almost miss it? By the time I got home, a message blinked on the answering machine. David. His voice was uncertain. "Mom, I know you're mad. I know I messed up, but can we try to talk again? Maybe over dinner?" The old me would have said yes immediately, trying to smooth the edges, patch the cracks, but the new steadiness inside me knew better. So I didn't call him back right away. I let the message sit, just as he had left it. Instead, I made myself a simple supper: roasted chicken, steamed green beans, a small baked potato. I ate at the table instead of on the couch, letting the quiet be a companion instead of a void. After dinner, I took out the community newsletter again and circled the Memory and Moments group meeting. It was tomorrow. I wasn't sure if I'd go, but just considering it felt like stepping toward something larger than loneliness. That night, as I lay in bed, the house breathed softly around me. Not empty, not too big, just full of years and stories and echoes of laughter. My home, my choice. And as sleep pulled me under, I felt a growing certainty that I wasn't only reclaiming my autonomy, I was beginning to reclaim my life, piece by piece, quietly, deliberately. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, if you can call the soft chime on my old bedside clock an alarm at all. My bedroom was bathed in a muted peach glow, the kind that makes the world feel gentle for a few rare minutes. I lay still, listening to the house breathe. There was a steadiness to it now, a rhythm returning after the tremor of that afternoon I'd found movers on my porch. I made myself coffee, the rich scent filling the kitchen as sunlight crept across the counter. The memory and moments group met at 10. I wasn't sure if I'd actually go until, quite suddenly, I found myself grabbing my purse and keys. Some decisions, I guess, make themselves. The library was only a short drive away, a red brick building with wide glass doors and blooming chrysanthemums out front. Inside, the air smelled of paper and quiet ambition. A librarian pointed me toward a small meeting room with a sign taped to the door. Memory and Moments Circle. All welcome. I took a breath and stepped in. The room held 10 or 12 people, all around my age or a little older. They sat in soft chairs arranged in a loose circle. A few smiled, a few nodded. One woman with short white hair patted the seat beside her. "I'm Helen," she whispered as I sat. "First time?" I nodded. "Is it that obvious?" "Oh, honey," she said with a warm chuckle. "We can always spot the new ones. You've got the brave but nervous look." The meeting began with light conversation. People shared memories, a childhood recipe, a bus ride during the war, the first time someone used a smartphone without asking their kids for help. The stories drifted between laughter and soft hearts. When it came to me, I didn't plan to tell the truth. I thought I'd mention something small. My garden, perhaps, or the year Walter and I got lost on a road trip. Instead, I found myself speaking about the movers, about coming home to find my life being packed into boxes, about the forged signature, about how invisible I had allowed myself to become. A hush settled over the room. Not pity, not shock, recognition. Helen placed a gentle hand on my arm. "My son tried to sell my car without telling me," she said. "Thought he was being practical. I took a bus for months just to prove I could." Another man, thin with deep-set eyes, nodded. "My daughter tried to take over my finances. Told me she didn't want me to make mistakes. I had to hire a lawyer to remind her I wasn't gone yet." Their stories softened something tight inside me. I wasn't alone. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't being unreasonable. There's a strange comfort in having your pain mirrored by strangers who understand it better than your own children. After the meeting ended, several people lingered to chat. Helen insisted we get coffee next week. I agreed more quickly than I expected. Walking out of the library, I felt taller somehow, as if speaking the truth had added inches to my spine. When I reached home, a car was parked in my driveway. My heart jumped until I realized it wasn't David's. It was Mary's. She stood on the porch, arms crossed tightly across her chest, her expression unreadable. Seeing her there, my daughter, who rarely visited except for holidays, sent a strange ache through me. "Mom," she said as soon as I stepped out of the car, "we need to talk." I unlocked the door and gestured for her to come inside. She followed slowly, her eyes scanning the room as though looking for signs of how I was really doing. She finally spoke. "David told me everything. He's upset, embarrassed. He said you called the police." I poured myself a glass of water and took a slow sip before answering. "I didn't call on him. I called for mediation, for documentation. I needed it to stop." "I get that," she said, but her voice wavered. "But he's your son." "And I'm his mother," I replied softly. "Not his project." She looked away, her shoulders sinking. "He's worried about you." "Worried," I repeated, "or convinced he knows better than I do." Mary didn't respond at first. Her eyes glistened with something I couldn't quite name. Regret, maybe, or realization. "You know," she said quietly, "I always thought you were fine. You never asked for anything. You always made everything look so handled." "I tried," I admitted. But maybe I tried too hard. I kept my loneliness tucked away like something shameful. She finally met my eyes. "I'm sorry." We stood in that stillness, two women separated by years of things unsaid. "I'm not angry," I told her, "but I need you both to understand that I still have a life, still have choices, and I intend to use them." Her expression softened, edges melting. "What do you want from us, Mom?" "Respect," I said, "and space, and when I ask for help, not control." She nodded slowly. "I can do that." A quiet relief washed through me, warm and steady. We talked a little longer, about the house, about the legal steps I'd taken, about the group I'd joined at the library. She seemed surprised, but in a way that held admiration rather than concern. Before leaving, she hugged me tightly. "You're stronger than I realized," she whispered. I smiled into her shoulder. "Maybe I'm just finally remembering." When she drove away, I stood on the porch for a while, breathing in the late afternoon air. The trees rustled gently, as if the world were leaning in to listen. Have you ever felt yourself returning to who you used to be, and yet becoming someone entirely new? That evening, I made myself a cup of mint tea and sat by the window as the sky softened into twilight. For the first time in a long while, I felt something like quiet hope settling into the corners of my home. I wasn't done reclaiming my life, not even close. The following morning, sunlight spilled across my bedroom floor like warm honey. Slow and gentle, I stretched under the covers, taking in the quiet of the house. But it wasn't the old quiet, the one that felt heavy, almost suffocating. This was different, lighter, more like peace than emptiness. I got dressed and made myself a bowl of cereal, the kind with dried strawberries that always softened too quickly. As I ate, I looked around the kitchen and noticed all the small signs of living I had ignored for so long. The grocery list pinned with a magnet Walter brought back from a fishing trip, the mail neatly stacked, the half-finished crossword puzzle on the counter. Little anchors of a life that was still mine. Around mid-morning, I drove to the library again. Not for a meeting this time, but just to sit among people, to feel the comforting hum of soft conversations and rustling pages. I walked through the aisles, running my fingers along the spines of books like greeting old friends. While browsing the fiction section, I heard someone say, "Mrs. Grant?" I turned to see a tall man with a kind smile pushing a book cart. Tom, the librarian. I remembered him from years ago when Walter and I used to come in on rainy Sundays. "It's good to see you back," he said. "It's been a while." "Yes," I replied. "Life swept me off course for a bit." He chuckled. "Happens to the best of us. Anything I can help you find?" I hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe something uplifting, something about starting over." He tapped his chin thoughtfully. "I have just the thing." He returned with a novel whose cover showed a sunrise over a quiet town. It felt like a message of sorts. We talked for a few more minutes about reading habits, the beautiful weather, how the community center was renovating its garden. Simple things. But sometimes simple things are what tether you back to the world. When I got home, there was a large envelope on the porch with my name written neatly across the front. I recognized the letterhead immediately, my lawyer's office. My stomach tightened, but not with fear, with readiness. Inside was documentation confirming new financial protections, bank access restricted, property rights affirmed, and a letter drafted by Mr. Harlan reminding David that any further attempts to act on my behalf without written consent would carry legal consequences. I sat at the table, tracing my finger along the embossed seal. It felt monumental, like a cornerstone set firmly at last. Later that afternoon, I decided to tend to the backyard flower beds. They'd been neglected since spring, and the soil felt dry and resentful beneath my gloves. As I pulled weeds and turned the dirt, a memory surfaced. Walter kneeling beside me, teasing me for planting tulips too close together. "You're not planting soldiers," he used to say with a laugh. "Give them room to breathe." Room to breathe. Maybe I finally understood what he meant. About flowers, but also about myself. I had been so tightly wound around my children's needs, their schedules, their opinions, that I hadn't left space for my own life to grow. A car door slammed, jolting me gently from the memory. When I stood, brushing dirt from my knees, I saw David walking toward me through the gate. His shoulders looked slumped, his steps slower than usual. "Mom," he said quietly, "got your lawyer's letter." I took off my gardening gloves, waiting for whatever storm or plea he might bring, but instead, he let out a long, unsteady breath. "I didn't realize how much I scared you," he said, "or how much I overstepped." He paused, rubbing his forehead. "I thought I was doing the right thing. But I see now, it wasn't my right to decide." His voice sounded raw, like someone confessing something they had only just understood themselves. "I didn't mean to take your life away," he murmured. "I was just afraid you were alone." I felt something soften inside me, not forgiveness, not immediately, but a kind of recognition. He wasn't a villain. He was a child who had forgotten his mother was still an adult. "I appreciate you saying that," I told him. "But I need you to understand something clearly. I may be older, but I'm not gone. I'm not incapable. I'm still living my life day by day." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I want to do better," he said. "If you'll let me." I didn't rush into an answer. Instead, I laid my gloves on the fence and looked him in the eye. "Then listen when I tell you what I need," I said. "Not what you think I need." A breeze rustled through the trees. For a moment, it felt like the whole backyard was holding its breath. David finally nodded. "Okay, Mom." He hugged me before leaving, a cautious, hesitant hug, as if he feared he might break me. But I hugged him back firmly enough to show him I wouldn't. After he drove away, I stood alone amid the flower beds. The soil under my fingertips felt rich and forgiving. I pressed a few tulip bulbs into the earth, spacing them widely, room to breathe, just like Walter taught me. Have you ever felt a small doorway open inside yourself, leading to a life you didn't realize was still possible? As the sun dipped low and painted the yard in gold, I realized something quietly monumental. I wasn't fighting for survival anymore. I was building something new, and this time, it would be on my terms. The next week unfolded with a gentleness I hadn't felt in years, like life had stopped rushing past me long enough for me to catch up. The trees outside my kitchen window had shifted fully into autumn, their leaves blushing deep red and gold. Every morning, as I sipped my coffee, I watched them fall softly to the ground, each one a tiny reminder that letting go can also be a kind of beauty. One morning, I found myself humming while making pancakes. Actual humming. It surprised me so much that I laughed out loud. There was a time, long before the movers, before the forged signature, before the hushed loneliness, when I used to hum all the time. While cooking, while folding laundry, while waiting for Walter to come home from work. Somehow, that part of me was returning. By late afternoon, I decided to visit the community center. Stephanie had mentioned they were holding an informal crafting meetup. I wasn't much of an artist, but I wanted to be around people again, to hear laughter, to participate in small talk, to remember what it felt like to belong somewhere that wasn't defined by family roles or crises. The center buzzed with activity. Several tables had been pushed together, covered with fabric scraps, colored paper, and little bowls of buttons and ribbons. A dozen people chatted happily as they worked on projects in various stages of progress. When I walked in, Helen waved me over enthusiastically. "There you are," she said, patting the chair next to her. "We thought you'd gotten cold feet." "Never," I said with a smile. "I'm becoming quite courageous lately." She chuckled. "Good. Courage looks good on you." I sat down and began working on a small wreath made of felt leaves. It was nothing impressive, but my hands enjoyed the rhythm of it. Around me, conversations flowed. Stories about grandchildren, gardens, funny mishaps with technology, recipes that had been perfected over decades. At one point, Stephanie approached me with a gentle smile. "Evelyn, a few of us are creating an autumn display for the lobby. Would you like your wreath to be part of it?" I was startled by how proud that made me feel. "I'd love that," I said. When the meetup ended, Helen hugged me goodbye. "Coffee next Tuesday," she reminded me. "Non-negotiable." Walking to my car, I felt lighter, like something inside me had quietly unlocked. When I got home, there was a message from David on the answering machine. Not rushed, not defensive, just calm. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot. If you're open to it, maybe we could start fresh. Maybe dinner this weekend? No agenda, just dinner." I stood there in the hallway, listening to his voice, letting the words settle. A month ago, that kind of request would have filled me with anxiety, an urge to fix things, to smooth tension. Now, the decision felt entirely mine. I called him back later that night. "Dinner sounds all right," I said. "But not at your place. Not at a restaurant either. Let's meet somewhere neutral." "How about the cafe near the lake?" he offered. "The one with the blackberry pie." "That will do," I said. We settled on Friday. After hanging up, I sat at the dining table, running my fingers along the wood grain. It had been so long since I'd felt prepared for a conversation rather than bracing myself for it. Friday came with a crisp breeze and skies the color of faded denim. I arrived at the cafe a few minutes early and chose a table by the window. The view of the lake, rippling softly under the autumn sun, helped steady my breath. David arrived looking nervous but earnest. He carried himself differently now, less sure of his authority, more aware of the spaces he had previously filled too loudly. We ordered sandwiches and shared a slice of blackberry pie, just like we used to when he was younger. For a few minutes, we talked about small things, the weather, work, how his kids were doing in school. It felt almost normal. Then he took a deep breath and said, "Mom, I'm really sorry." This time, I could hear the truth in it. Not obligation, not guilt, understanding. "I know I caused you pain," he continued. "I acted like you weren't capable, and that wasn't fair. I thought being responsible meant taking over. I see now that I was taking away instead." I listened quietly, stirring my tea. His words fell gently, like leaves drifting to the ground, soft but unmistakable. "I'm still learning how to let you be you," he said. "That's all I want," I replied softly. "To be seen, to be asked before decisions are made for me. To be included in my own life." He nodded, eyes shining. "I'll do better, I want to." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We both will." For the first time in months, I felt us meeting in the middle, where respect lived, where love wasn't tangled with control or assumption. After dinner, he walked me to my car. The wind tugged at the edges of my scarf, and I saw him instinctively reach out to fix it, then pull his hand back, unsure. I smiled and adjusted it myself, and he smiled back, understanding. On the drive home, I noticed how different my chest felt. No tightness, no ache, just an expanding softness, a sense of possibility. Later that night, as I curled up with the library book Tom recommended, I realized something almost startling in its simplicity. My life wasn't waiting to be returned to me. It had been here all along. I just needed to step back into it. Have you ever had that moment when you realize the world didn't shrink? You just stopped walking toward it? As I turned the page, the house felt quietly alive around me, and for the first time in a very long time, so did I. The next morning arrived soft and quiet, the way certain endings do when they're really beginnings in disguise. A pale gold light filtered through the curtains as I sat up in bed, listening to the steady hum of the house. My house. The one I had almost lost without ever choosing to let it go. I wrapped my robe around my shoulders and padded into the kitchen. The kettle hissed softly on the stove, filling the air with the warm, familiar scent of chamomile. As I waited for it to steep, I glanced at the new calendar I'd hung on the wall, little squares slowly filling with handwritten notes. Coffee with Helen, craft meetup, library book return, dinner with David next week. These weren't obligations. They were invitations, signs of a life being tended again. Later that afternoon, I walked into the backyard with a basket of bulbs, tulips, daffodils, crocuses. Walter and I used to plant them together every fall, kneeling side by side in the cool dirt, imagining how they'd bloom, come spring. I knelt by the flower bed, pressing each bulb gently into the soil. The earth felt cool and steady beneath my palms, grounding me. While I worked, memories drifted in and out, of raising children, surviving losses, navigating the quiet years after Walter's passing. For so long, I had mistaken solitude for a kind of fading. But solitude can also be a space where things grow unseen. As I brushed soil from my hands, I realized how far I'd come. A few weeks ago, I'd been a woman who walked into her own home to find her life being packed away in cardboard boxes, a woman who felt her voice tremble like a loose shutter in a storm. But today, I felt steady, rooted, alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. In the early evening, I drove to the lake, the same one where David and I had shared blackberry pie not long ago. The water shimmered under the setting sun, rippling like a sheet of warm metal. I walked the path slowly, breathing in the crisp autumn air, watching the leaves swirl and settle around my feet. Near the dock, I found a bench and sat down. The world felt wide again. Nobody was trying to move me, manage me, contain me. I was here because I chose to be. A few minutes passed before an older gentleman approached, someone I recognized from the community center's garden walk. His name was Frank, a soft-spoken widower who always had soil under his nails and a story about tomatoes. He tipped his hat in greeting. "You mind if I sit?" "Not at all," I said. We watched the water together in comfortable silence. After a while, he said, "Heard you stood up for yourself. That takes strength." I smiled softly. Took me a while to realize I still had some. He nodded. Most folks don't know their own strength till life pokes at it a bit. We talked about little things after that. The weather, the library's new display, the best brand of tea for cold nights. It was simple, warm, and real. The kind of conversation that nourishes without demanding anything in return. On my drive home, the sky deepened into a velvety blue, dotted with early stars. I rolled down the window slightly, letting the crisp air brush my cheek. For the first time in so long, I felt like I was moving towards something rather than away from it. When I got home, I brewed a final cup of tea and settled into my favorite armchair, the one the movers had almost carried away. The house glowed softly in the lamplight, each room feeling lived in, claimed, reclaimed. I thought of David, of Mary, of the fear and love tangled in their good intentions. Maybe this chapter wasn't about punishing them, but teaching all of us how to begin again, how to see one another clearly, how to let each other grow. I leaned back, exhaling deeply. "Walter," I whispered into the quiet. I think you'd be proud. And I think he would be. Because I didn't just fight for a house. I fought for myself, for my autonomy, for my dignity, for a life that still had years left to bloom. Have you ever reached a moment like that? Where you feel yourself finally returning home? To yourself? As I turned off the lamp and felt the soft hush of the house settle around me, I understood something true and steady. Sometimes, the greatest retribution isn't about winning a battle. It's about reclaiming your life with gentle, unwavering certainty. And that, I suppose, is exactly what I did. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, I'd be grateful if you liked and subscribed. Your support helps these stories find more hearts that need them. And tell me, if you were in my place, what would you have done?